So today we are going to be looking at television and the symbolic criminalization of young people. And this article was written by Mike Wayne, Leslie Henderson, Craig Murray, and Julian Peatley. So basically, if we have to introduce the topic in a general sentence, this essay talks about the criminalization of young people in the news media. I mean, that's it in one sentence, but obviously there's a lot more to it. So let's look into some background. This concept is really not new. We can start in the 1990s when there was a big shift in youth media representations. Basically, what happened was youth were linked to crime and basically shown as threats to public for the first time. So here's what the authors studied: the frequency of appearances of youth in the news media, the frequency of their use as news sources, and the kinds of actions and behavior that received news attention. The results they got were pretty interesting. For starters, 47% of the stories about young people were about them committing crime. 72% of the stories were about violent crime, and 18% were about terrorism. So let's do some math here. That's 90% of the crime stories about youth were either about violent crime or terrorism. Additionally, 50% of the crime stories, another young person was a victim. Additionally, 43% of the stories about youth show them in some way being at risk. Obviously, something is going on here, right? So here's what the author explains. The news media is highly focused on youth crime. And when youth aren't being shown as criminals, they're being shown as either victims or at risk. So this is obviously an exaggeration of our youth. I mean, they're not all criminals and they're not all victims. There's so much more to them, right? So here's what Robert Rainier explains. Basically, the news media exaggerates the threat of crime and the threat of crime that youth creates in order to create fear and therefore promote punishment and a higher policy in society. So why is this important? Well, because news coverage of crime is a major factor in shaping the public's perception of how much crime is going on in society and which crimes are being committed and by who. Next, the authors explain how this is important to them, and they describe what they called the mean world syndrome. So here's basically what they describe. When there is an increase of fear in the public, there's also an increase on the dependence of authority, support of increasingly authoritarian policies, and the acceptance of harder punishments all throughout society. So what the heck is going on here, right? Well, here are the conclusions that the authors came to. Number one, news media is failing to give viewers an understanding of the full range of elements involved in the lives of youth. I mean, youth are good, funny, smart, capable, and caring beings. They're humans. They're not just criminals and victims running around. Secondly, young people appear most commonly as either victims or perpetrators of crime, and there is a strong association between young people and violent crime. Lastly, by consistently portraying youth as criminals, the media is feeding into the public's fears and promoting an increase in state power as a viable solution to crime. So what needs to happen now? Basically, the media should start showing youth for what they are: good people, not criminals and victims. We need to support these youth. We love them.